Hello, and welcome to this virtual Talks at Google event. My name is Holly, and I'm partnering with the Asian Google Network to host this conversation as part of our Lunar New Year celebrations. I'm incredibly excited to introduce our guest for today, Charles Yu. Charlie is the author of 4 books, the most recent one being Interior Chinatown, which is the recipient of the 2020 National Book Award for Fiction. Outside of being a novelist, he is also a television writer. He has been nominated for 2 Writers Guild of America awards for his work on the HBO series Westworld. Without further ado, I would like us all to give a very warm welcome to Charlie.
Hi, Holly. Hi, everyone.
So much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So Lunar New Year is tomorrow. Do you have any plans to celebrate?
Sort of. We ordered some. My wife has been using this app, We. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it. It's kind of a lifesaver. My parents are into it now, and my in-laws, everyone's into it. So, we've got some goodies. I don't know yet what's in store, but we're just going to eat some stuff, basically. But
yeah, same here.
How about you?
We're also going to eat some stuff. My mom went to 99 Ranch Market yesterday and bought a bunch of things. So I'm excited to see what we're eating tomorrow. And I'll probably go pick up a cake too from 85. Yeah, was it a holiday that you celebrated when you were growing up? And do you have any favorite traditions from it?
Yeah, I mean, usually in a normal year, we would be going to see my parents who live, in Southern California as well. But obviously this year we're not going. But in growing up, we'd like clean the house, turn on all the lights. We'd eat noodles. My mom would always give us this one really bitter vegetable. So we'd eat something bitter. And we'd eat a bunch of snacks. And of course, money. Very important part of it. Receiving it mostly. Now I guess I'm supposed to be giving it, but
yeah. Is that something that you do for your kids? Like, do you still give them red envelopes?
They get them from their grandparents.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I guess we could give them, but I don't know. They're already, they're already limited partners in our family.
Right.
In our family estate or whatever. No, I'm just kidding. I guess at some point we should also be doing that. But
yeah, awesome. Thank you for sharing. I want to talk a little bit now about Interior Chinatown. For folks who haven't yet read the book, it's about a guy named Willis Wu, who is an actor that lives in Chinatown. In the beginning, his job is to be a background character in a police television show called Black and White. One of the opening sentences of the book is, "Ever since you were a boy, you've dreamt of being Kung Fu Guy." To Willis and to his community, Kung Fu Guy is the highest level that you can get to as an Asian male actor. The book is about Willis's growth from internalizing those Hollywood stereotypes into being an individual who feels like he can be more. So my first question for you is, when you were around Willis's age, was there a particular role or legend that you dreamed of being?
I mean, Bruce Lee was the guy for sure. I remember like watching Fist of Fury. I was pretty young and just thinking, he's like a superhero, but he was real. And then at some point, I'm pretty sure I wanted to be several of the Street Fighter 2 characters, but that was less of an attainable goal. I think Bruce Lee was like a formative sort of impression from a pretty early age.
Right. So the theme of roles and of identity seems to be a recurring one in your work, and you yourself have held multiple roles over the course of your career, from majoring in cell bio at UC Berkeley and then getting a JD at Columbia before becoming a corporate tech lawyer, and then being a television writer and now a novelist. How did you arrive at all the various roles that you've held over the years?
Mostly by not being like super good at any one of them. So it gave me the opportunity to keep exploring. And I'm like pretty serious about that. At Berkeley, I majored in MCB, they call it there, and I was a middling student on a good day. So I did a creative writing minor. So I was writing poetry actually when I was at Berkeley, uh, probably to the detriment of my biochem homework and test scores. So, um, you know, coming out of college, I applied to medical school and I didn't get in. So I ended up going to law school, which I thought would be a better fit anyway. My parents didn't really agree at first. But I thought, well, law school seems like a lot of reading and writing, and that is what I enjoy. So I'll get to do that for 3 years. Um, and then working as a lawyer, I felt like, both, really grateful. It was like a stable profession. I felt like, okay, I can sort of be a responsible son and, eventually get married and start my own family. And, but I also never quite fully felt like I fit that world. It felt like a role that I just couldn't inhabit fully. So over time, I got more comfortable with it. But I think early on, like right at the beginning of when I started to practice law, I started writing fiction as this kind of outlet because I think I knew I needed to carve out a little bit of like something for myself. Is it Google? Yeah, Google's famous for this like 80-20 thing. Is that just like a myth or is that real? Like, do you actually get to spend 20% of your time doing
No,
something
that's real.
Wow. Well, if Google has any, I'll check LinkedIn, but if Google ever recruits for novelists for
Yeah.
metafiction, I will definitely be submitting a resume. I definitely could not pass your interview though. So, uh, so yeah, I started writing fiction. I created my own 80-20 rule, but it was more like, you know, like I don't know what the number is. It's like 95-5, and the five would mostly coming late at night and weekends, just whenever I could carve out time. But it was definitely a necessary like thing. It like nourished me and felt like, okay, uh, this is definitely my job, and then this is what I do, uh, creative, and those two worlds kind of they just like became parallel tracks, and I decoupled money from writing like right at the beginning. I never associated sort of money with writing or my livelihood with sort of this other pursuit, which I think was really helpful. It like freed me to like write stuff that was not commercially viable to the dismay of my publishers. But no, I mean, they were very supportive. But I think because of that, I was just free to, um, you know, explore and write these short stories, and eventually wrote a couple of novels. Um, and then a few years ago, it took a while to get there, but I got an opportunity to start working in television, and so that's sort of like my latest role that I'm trying on, which is uh, TV writing.
Mhm. My impression of like the television industry, that seems really insular and hard to break into if you're an outsider. So how are you able to kind of get into television writing from like corporate law?
Yeah, it's a natural path. You just you just work as corporate lawyer for 13 years,
Right.
and then you apply for a TV job. I mean, you're not wrong. Uh, it's not easy to break into. I guess I don't want to minimize that because I think sometimes I I've talked about it in a way that makes it seem like, oh, I lucked into it or I wasn't looking, and then I realized that might come off as sort of like, anyone can do it, or you just have to randomly get lucky, which is part of, there's certainly a lot of luck involved in like sort of how I stumbled my way into it. But yeah, there are sort of a few pathways, none of which I took. You can start working when you're whatever out of college or at any point as a writer's assistant, and sort of I'm talking about writing specifically, I guess, right? So you could start in sort of the as an assistant and then work your way up and try to get into a writing room. You can, or you can sort of, uh, write a bunch of scripts and hope that someone just hires you. There's a new path, not new, but there's another path, I guess, which is the side door that I took in, where you write something else, whether it's as a journalist or, as a scientist, I mean, or as in my case, fiction. And I think increasingly, there are, both, there's an increased demand for voices, in quantity, because there are like, 600 shows on TV now or whatever. And also in terms of diversity, I think they're really looking for different points of view and different kinds of stories. So it, I, y- all of which is to say, I think that it is hard to break into, and yet there are opportunities. And I mean, to like be reductive about it, the way that I sort of found my way in was I spent, all these years writing fiction and kind of developing a very idiosyncratic voice. And for better or worse, that, you know, became kind of my style. And I think that's sort of um, what I have to offer, is that there's actually, like, I don't, oh, did I cut out for a second there?
You did for a little bit.
Ooh, I was in the void. It looked really weird, and now I'm back in reality. I think it was trying to tell me I'm talking too much, but I think where was it? This? Oh yeah, my weird voice. I think it you know, all those years of writing just sort of experimental short stories and books, um, weirdly became like the qualification for a job in TV.
Mm.
Very unexpected, but and so I guess in that way, I would say at least TV feels kind of open. And again, not to say it's easy, but if you're willing to, take the chance that maybe no one will like your stuff, but go and cultivate a voice that's interesting to other people, or that happens to end up being interesting to other people, then that might be a way in.
Yeah, I'm curious about how you were able to cultivate a voice. Like when you were working your other jobs, how did you know how to revise your work? And how did you know what was working, what wasn't working?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because I guess it's sort of like you want to iterate and do it, but you want to do it in a direction that helps, not like
Mhm.
practice your mistakes or get worse or just turn in place. Um, and it feels like blind stumbling in the moment, um, but I think it's a matter of uh, I don't know. I don't have a great. I've struggled to come up with what it's like, and you'd think by now I would have figured out a way to talk about it in a concise way that is actually insightful. But what I instead of that, I'll just say something that will sound sort of like pull yourself up by the bootstraps. It's like you sort of have to teach yourself how to learn,
Mhm.
and you don't know if it's going to work. Actually, I mean, you get a little bit of feedback from the outside world at first. It's like, well, they took the story, so that's good, but um, those events, at least at first, are pretty few and far between. So in writing the stories, it's more just following what interests you, I think. And if
Mhm.
it interests you, it probably interests someone else. In
Mhm.
other words, I think if it's an internally directed thing, it, it's like, well, you can't really be wrong about that. You're connecting with it as a writer, so hopefully someone else will. But as
Mhm.
opposed to like looking for some external, like, ooh, what would sell, or what would be a great pitch. I've found anyway that I'm not good at that. I think some people are very good at that. Like, here's a high concept, I can now pitch this and
Right.
sell it to someone else. But I've just always sort of followed in a kind of random walk. What felt like a random walk ends up being kind of like, to eh, not so random. When I look back at like what I'm actually interested in, I end up telling stories about like three or four things over and over again. But
Mhm.
yeah.
So when you're writing, would you say that you're mostly like writing for the self? And is that different than when you're writing for television? Like, do you also have that same mindset?
That's a good question. Yeah, I would say as a general matter, like with fiction, you have I feel like I have the luxury of um, just like there's no budget, there's no physical or logistical constraint. You're just saying, what am I interested in? I don't even necessarily have to know what this looks like. I can do something conceptual, or I can have ambiguity. Whereas for TV, there's a couple of, really key differences, right? It's a very collaborative medium by nature, which is a good thing, but it necessarily changes the process. You can't just drive in a singular way towards sort of what you're chasing. It's a someone has to physically be able to make a set. You have to make it tangible at some point, whatever that looks like. It might be something very atmospheric and ethereal, but there's got to be someone you have to explain to a production designer, or a production designer has to be able to literalize your words at some point, and a director has to direct it. So, and actors have to act it. So, and I think the last one is, there's obviously there's a kind of a change in format, and there's a lot of experimentation within TV, but there's, on some level, you're trying to make something that will appeal to a large-ish audience. It's not the 20 million people that it used to be for ER or whatever, but it's still hopefully, hundreds of thousands of people. And it's a different thing than writing a short story or a book where you're like, I don't know if anyone's gonna like, like I just gonna write it.
Right. Yeah, I guess like since you have so much varied experience now, and if you could go back in time to high school with like all of this knowledge, are there any academic or career decisions that you think you would make differently?
Ooh. uh that's such a good question. um it's sort of like the counterfactual thing with just life decisions in general. My wife and I talk about this sometimes. It's like, once, anyway, for us, once we had kids, it's like, well, anything that would have changed that timeline, we don't want that, because we don't want, and also just with, my partner, like anything that would have changed if I had met her, I wouldn't want that. But what your question is more specific, like what in my academic timeline would I mean, I would have gone to class more often at Berkeley. There's one or two courses I would have avoided taking, like CS3 at Berkeley, in which I failed to learn Scheme. I think it was. I think that's language.
Mhm.
Not great at programming. No, I'm. It's weird. Like, maybe this is just like retroactive, you know, uh, rationalizing, but I feel like a lot of the choices that in the moment seemed like mistakes ended up, giving me experience that, had I not had that, the benefit of failing at something, or uh, finding out, this isn't for me, or I just got things from places that were unexpected, in ways that were unexpected, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Going back to the topic of having varied voices in television, I really enjoyed the essay that you wrote last year for Time called What It's Like to Never Ever See Yourself on TV. I want to read a short excerpt from it that I felt was especially powerful, and is also, I think, ties a lot into the work that you did for Interior Chinatown. So the essay is about the importance of having diverse representation. You wrote, "So why does it matter? Who cares? Because TV shows and movies are both cause and effect. Like it or not, they're the stories we consume, the stories we tell ourselves and listen to about ourselves, the inputs, the fuel, the background, cultural, and mental landscape." In Interior Chinatown, we see Willis internalize those stereotypes that Hollywood has typecast for him, specifically that of the generic Asian man. But in the book and in your essay, you push back against that kind of acceptance of stereotype. I think that's something that is really relevant, especially this whole past year and in these last few weeks, as we have seen how difficult it is still to be in an Asian body or to be in a Black body in America. What to you does it mean to be a normal American, and what are some ways in which we can collectively stand up for each other in order to make that happen?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up and framed it that way. You know, sadly, the events of like last year and even including just the last few weeks have brought to light that there is still a a sense for some people anyway in which Asian bodies don't read as American; they read as other, um, and they. And what is that? What is it going to take to break that perception? Of course, it's been created and strengthened over not just decades but over a century. Of of the first Chinese that first came here, probably in the 1830s to start working, all the way through waves of people from Korea, Taiwan, and not to mention earlier waves of Japanese immigrants, and then that's just a small subset, sort of like, of course, when you're talking about Asian Americans, it's a very large group of like 20 different countries, South
Mhm.
Asians. But I digress. I think, what is it about, um, you know, what is it about the sort of, um, why is it such a barrier psychologically to overcome, to break this perception that um, certain physical characteristics don't, you know, they're just impossible to assimilate in the imagination. To me, it is a feedback loop, that this is not by any means the only cause, but it's one that I uh, am attuned to because I guess of what I do now for work. But I also think it is a powerful cause, meaning TV and film. And I think the way that feedback loop worked and still works is that, growing up, I didn't see Asians on TV. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I'm in my mid 40s now. And I think it's a lot different now for my kids, who are in middle school. But growing up, you didn't see Asians on TV. And if you did, they were doing, they were either like delivering food or they're doing martial arts, and they
Mhm.
generally didn't talk, right? So, and if they did, it was with an accent.
Right.
So it was there's this very mixed experience of like, ooh, there's an Asian on TV. That's so exciting. And also like kind of shame, right? Because it's like, that's the representation. That's the one we get, for this year. And then you got to wait till next year till there's like some other kung fu storyline on some show. And um, I think that experience, at least for me, was very formative in that it both made me sensitive to perceptions of you know of Asians in America, and feel like outside of some kind of the main story. That really goes to sort of why I wrote this book this way. Is it never felt like um, Asian Americans could be part of the main conversation. It just felt
Mhm.
like we were a side note. Um, and I think the way that TV specifically contributes to it, in this kind of invisibility of Asians, is that we get used to seeing a distorted picture, a filtered version. Um, it's being filtered invisibly, and because of that, I feel like you go to TV and that's not reality, and yet
Mhm.
your brain on some level takes it as a substitute for reality. So that when you see the Asian on TV, all of a sudden that that filtered reality for a minute gets like a glitch in the matrix. Like, oh yeah, that's right, there are Asians. But and so that disconnect is like why it's such a jarring experience. I think that feedback loop is starting to get broken. Now you can like see an Asian on TV and it's not like, oh my God, there's an Asian on TV. But that's a pretty recent thing. And, I don't think that, I certainly won't be complacent and just thinking, well, now that the ball has started to roll, it's only going to get better from here. I think it's important that, in these representations of our faces and our bodies, they people just start to see it. Oh yeah, that can be an American. You just see an Asian face, you don't think not an American immediately, or speaks with an accent. You just don't carry as much of that baggage. Um, that's the goal, and that takes time, and it takes volume, I think. Boy, I just talked for a really long time. I could have said that much more succinctly, but
No, yeah, thank you for sharing those thoughts. In the book, you distinguish being a myth from a legend, and to be legendary is to be like Bruce Lee, who you write is an idealized avatar of Asianness and awesomeness permanently set on expert difficulty. But a myth, on the other hand, is something that's more nebulous and something that's constructed from contradictions and redundancies. So in the book, like the character of older brother, we worship our legends, but we dream to grow up to be like our myths. Do you think that there's also a feedback loop between what we dream after and how we perform ourselves for others?
yeah, that's a really great question. I think there is. I think, in imagining older brother, it didn't take that much, fictionalization. That was definitely this kind of, uh, I don't know, nebulous but very sort of real thing. For me growing up anyway, in Southern California as like teenager in the '90s, it's like, um, how can you how can you kind of have how can you be cool, for a group of people that generally isn't ever seen as, or back then wasn't like what you would think of as cool, right? So there was this unconscious internalization, I think, for me anyway, of like, I want to perform what's expected of me. I want to, at the same time, I'm trying to achieve and be, either a good student or a good associate at the law firm. Um, I'm trying to kind of be invisible. I'm trying to like essentially like fly under the radar by like how I dress, how I talk. So, scrub off all the kind of rough edges, like make sure I can play the role uh, in a way that doesn't draw any attention to me. And yet at the same time, I'm struggling with, what are these stereotypes? Like, why do I feel like I'm invisible? Like, well, partly because I've made myself invisible. I'm trying not to be noticed. I'm trying to say, oh yeah, he's just one of the associates. I don't want to stick out as the Asian guy, even though that's basically what I am a lot of times in the room. Back then, you know, uh, there were lots of times where I was probably the only person of color in the room. And yeah, with that comes this kind of heightened self-consciousness of about, how do I both represent what I am, but not represent what I am. I don't know.
Mhm. Mm. Yeah. I guess also like how do you know what you are is like another more
Hmm.
existential question.
Yeah.
But do you think that the performance of what others expect of you, do you think that's ever a good thing?
um I don't know. um
Yeah.
what I'm curious as to, do you have like, what's the right answer to that question?
I don't know if there's a right answer. That was just something that I was thinking about when I was reading your book. Like, I guess maybe a scenario could be, if someone grows up with the expectation, for example, that they are supposed to go into medicine and they go through all those motions and they go to med school and they become a doctor, and then later in their life, they're like, "You know what? I'm glad that I'm a doctor and I really like my job, and I'm glad that I did this even though it wasn't what I originally thought I wanted." Maybe it's something like that. Um,
That's a really good example. uh a sense of like responsibility, or where the role is something positive, because I think, or another example might be like, now I'm a dad. Well, not now, I guess that happened a while ago now. uh, I'm just realizing I'm a dad with a 13 and 11 year old. But yeah, I do think about that. The way I sort of envision it is, like you're wearing a costume, right? And it doesn't fit quite right. And so there's like an inch, it's like an envelope around you, there's an inch of space between whatever you is to your existential question, how do you know what you are? You're just whatever this is. And then on top of that, you're putting, the lawyer costume for the day, or the grown-up costume, or the dad. And sometimes those roles, yeah, can be positive, even as there can be constraints and things that you want to transcend or subvert. They still give a kind of, I don't know, guide to your performance, in terms of how should I be with respect to other people? What do I owe other people? What do I owe to society, I guess, at large, so whether that's in family or with friends or in a professional setting. So I guess the answer to the question is yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm
Continuing on.
assuming this. I'm sorry. I'm assuming this is a job interview at Google, right? Is that what we're doing, or it's not? Okay.
Maybe. Secret. Continuing on the thread of the tension between performativity and authenticity, the setting of the book Chinatown, as you point out, also has this inherent conflict to it. On the one hand, it holds the very real lives of the immigrants who have passed through it and are still living in there today, while at the same time, it presents itself in ways that align with what others expect Chinese culture to look and feel like. I wonder if you think it's even possible to construct a Chinatown that both honors its culture and its history while also moving away from those expectations that have been imposed by predominantly white gaze.
Oof. Um, hmm.
Maybe not, I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's such a good question. I'm like trying to figure out something punchy because I feel like I keep sort of rambling. It's so interesting that I want to talk about it instead of sort of like saying something about it. Performativity, and like, can we move past? Uh, can, can we move past sort of whatever we're stuck in? Basically, is that the gist of?
Yeah, so I guess specifically in the sense of like a physical geographical space that
Yeah.
itself performs.
Yeah. I think the answer is yes. I think I mean, it's also interesting to be talking about this in like a amalgam of physical and virtual that we all kind of live in now. Like there's a way in which like I now mostly see myself inside of a small box,
Right.
talking to another, I don't know, stream of bits that are coming that I think is a person on the other side. And so in constructing um, the Chinatown in this book, it was I had to sort of figure out what is this place, right? And I hit on this idea, that it was an amalgam of physical and cultural. That essentially it was a mental ghetto that of like uh, being Asian American. Can feel sometimes like you're trapped inside the representation of who you are supposed to be, whatever that is. And um, I think in a physical sense, it's already sort of um, so much more complex and layered, right? Because there are Asian Americans all over the country, in urban, suburban, rural areas. But um, I think for me, the question is really, it's like, how do you get out of um, whatever might be limiting in a more, I guess, less physical sense, in the kind of cultural imagination sense of like, and I don't know, I don't think I have a great answer to that question.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely something to think about in the future. But yeah, throughout the book, the main character is inspired by figures like Bruce Lee and by his father, who himself is a kung fu master. In one of your earlier novels, How to Live Safely in a Science Fictional Universe, the main character is also heavily influenced by the relationship he has with his father. How have your own father-son relationships, both as a father and as a son, informed your writing of these characters?
Yeah, it's um, heavily is the answer. There's always something pretty heavy about the dad in the things that I write, and sometimes the mom as well. My parents are Taiwanese immigrants. They came in the 60s, right after the sort of 65 Act, you know, released, the sort of, or lifted, I guess, quotas. And so they were part of a kind of wave. And so I'm, depending on how you count it, either a second generation or a first generation American. And I, to me, it's, there's such a distinct break between what, their lives started on an island, where there were like water buffalo walking around, and like, World, my dad was born in 39, so before World War II. And now, he's seen, and he's been here now for 55 years. So he's seen a lot more of American history than I have. And I think I've been deeply influenced by sort of the stories and anecdotes that I heard growing up from them, but also just watching them, both as a child and now as an adult. And I think that also changed again when I became a dad myself. I think I now was able to experience so many of the things that I saw him going through, but not realizing what it's like on the other side of that. And so that's really what I've always wanted to capture. That's usually the heart of what I like. When there's a kernel of something I want to write, it usually starts with some kind of moment between a parent and a child. I call it like the lying on the floor conversations. It's like, one of my favorite things to do used to be when my kids were little is like, we'd lie on the floor. Usually I was lying on the floor because I was so dead tired, like, because my kids are waking up at 5 a.m. and, either they're reading and I'm like falling asleep, or I'm supposed to be reading to them and they're falling asleep. But out of some of those moments, I have had some of, the most tender and honest moments I've ever had. And I don't know, those things are like, it's like, it's all wrapped up in there. It's like, I'm thinking about talking to my kid, and then I'm thinking about how my dad must have had moments like that with me and my mom. And then those feelings make me want to write them down, I guess. So.
Yeah, I definitely felt, I think, a lot of those tender moments in the book where Willis is talking to Phoebe. One of my most favorite conversations in the book is where Phoebe is telling her dad how to build a castle in the sky. I think that was one of like the most beautiful things in the book. Yeah, I have one last question before we move on to audience questions. What are you working on now, and what do we have to look forward to from you?
I'm working on a few things, which are I'm really excited about. One is I'm adapting Interior Chinatown for potentially to be a series on Hulu, and I'm really excited about that.
Wow.
Couple of other projects on TV that I am not allowed to talk about, so I won't. But those are also exciting, and trying to continue to write fiction. Short stories, and hopefully another book someday. But considering how long the last one took, I don't know. No promises on that. So.
Yeah, wow, I'm super excited for the series adaptation of Interior Chinatown.
Thanks.
Awesome. Now, okay, we'll take our first audience question. And okay, the first question says, what inspired you to write Interior Chinatown in a screenplay format?
Thanks for the question. I was, I'm a like a big believer of like, or not believer, but for whatever reason, my form and function always, have to be talking to each other. And until I find the form that excites me, I often can't make a story interesting. And so I kind of tried to write this book for a long time as a bunch of like fairy tales that were about assimilation. And it just didn't it didn't go for me emotionally. I think in terms of language, it didn't have a kind of energy that I needed to feel interested in it.
Mhm.
And then when the kind of character of Willis Wu comes out and or kind of fell out of my head in the first lines of the book where he says, you know, ever since you were a boy, you dreamt of being Kung Fu guy. You are not Kung Fu guy. All of a sudden I had a voice and I had a character, and I thought, oh, and I had a dream for that character. So I had I had a beginning and a place that the character wants to go. That was the moment where I thought, okay, this has the potential energy inside of this sentence to make me want to keep. It can go somewhere. And then, of course, the next question was immediately, oh, is he an actor? Is this a screenplay? And so then I struggled with that for a little bit of like, if I'm really going to write this as a screenplay, one, will that look too weird on the page? Will people want to read that? Will my publisher, what will they think? But it just felt like that's what was really interesting. And to finally answer your question, the thing that I really felt like that gives you is the ability to quickly visually say, here's an official script, here's the quote narrative, the mainstream narrative, and then you have characters who can sort of have asides,
Mhm.
talking in and around and above and below their characters' roles on the kind of show. So
Mhm.
having that ability to jump in and out of character um, was important. And a screenplay, I think a lot of people probably have read some screenplays, but even if you haven't, you know what it is kind of. And if you don't, it's not that hard to figure out. So in that case, the form really gave me sort of what I was looking for.
How are you going to, like, adapt like, how are you gonna write a screenplay of a screenplay, and how do you if you're gonna like, how do you differentiate between the screenplay and the novel from Willis's interior thoughts if it's all wrapped up in, like, a screenplay format?
Yeah, good question. Um, I wish I had thought of that question before. I agreed to try to adapt it for Hulu. Hulu has had many of those same questions. So if you have answers, please direct them to me. No, I don't know. I think the
Yeah.
challenge is to find a device um,
Mhm.
that gives you the interiority of a novel. I think, like for instance, on Hulu, there's Handmaid's Tale, and I think that show uses voiceover for June's character to good effect. I think, and I think, and voiceover isn't the only device you could have, but there are ways. I think, I hope there are ways to get some of that um,
Mhm.
duality and the kind of slipperiness of Willis's sort of consciousness, because that really is what the challenge will be, is like, how do you render a place that's supposed to be this kind of physical cultural or physical mental composite? What does
Mhm.
that look like? And then
Mhm.
also, what does it look like to have a person who's in and out of character? So i
Mhm.
I literally have been spending months trying to figure that out. So
Mhm. I guess in addition to, like, auditory ways, you could maybe think about, like, having different visual representations on screen of, like, when they're in, like, a show versus when they're not. But yeah, I don't know.
yes, right, exactly.
Yeah. Um, we'll take the next audience question now. It's from Julia. She says many Asian American writers have spoken about being pigeonholed because of race and pressure to write about the Asian American experience. Were these things you considered when writing both novels?
Yeah, thank you. um, Sort of. I mean, yes, I consider them, maybe not in like a very conscious, deliberate way. For the first novel, um, the first novel is, it is about immigrants from Taiwan, but I never say that word in the book. Uh,
Mhm.
and I actually had an experience at a reading where somebody asked me, "Why do you think that you've shied away from writing about race or ethnicity in an explicit way?" And it really kind of messed with my head in a good way. But I think eventually that question kind of uh, wormed its way into my consciousness and is part of why I wrote this book this way. Um, I was looking for a way to write about aspects of my experience growing up, or my parents' experience, or I think what I think of as generally some features of experience for being Asian in America, being of Asian descent in America. And I think the reason why it took so long for me to do it is I felt like I had to mesh, my somewhat limited skill set with that, and this was the way it came out. So
Mhm. Thank you. The next question is from Rachel. She says, "Hi, I love the book. Wondering how you conducted research about Chinatowns to inform the setting depicted in your book."
thanks. Thanks for reading it. I have talked about this book before, but Bonnie Tsui has a book called American Chinatown, which was like hugely helpful. It's a great book if anyone's interested to it. Basically talks about 5 different Chinatowns in America, and um, how over time they've come to both be a thing that actually exists, but also be a thing where people go to have a kind of cultural experience, I suppose, or a touristic experience. And then on top of that, there's the weird layer that, especially in LA, the Chinatowns, um, I think there were 2 different ones that have also been used to represent Chinatown on screen. So that layer really kind of twisted my brain into knots, because it's like, oh, so it's a thing, it's a representation of the thing for people to go visit, and then it's also playing itself on screen, a version of itself on screen. Um, Learning all of that was fascinating and also like challenging, because I thought, well, there's something in that, to like tease out, for this novel. Like, how do you capture? It just felt very much like um, a metaphor for the experience itself, I think, for being Asian American,
Mm,
at least for me.
right. Yeah. Yeah. I felt so too when I was reading the book. Our next question is from Ray. "Hi, Charlie. I know you've written for HBO, and Interior Chinatown is obviously very film influenced. How do you go between writing screenplays and writing novels? What's similar and what's different?"
Thanks. Hi, Ray. I try to, I try to toggle between the two. Uh, Sometimes I'm more successful than other times. I think they feed each other in positive ways. But I also think there can be times where I'm carrying tendencies or things from one arena into the other, and it's not helpful. Um, One, the good things that I think that I've learned from TV world to writing fiction are, it forces me to be much less precious about my writing. That's mostly a good thing, right? I think there's just a ruthlessness of like cut, 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 and whereas as a fiction writer, and I wish I had this. I mean, not to say fiction writers could have this independently of ever working in TV, but for me, it was just I didn't go to an MFA. I have never really had like a writers group. So I haven't had to workshop my stuff. I just get to be like really sort of like have my darlings for as long as I can keep them until my editor says cut these.
Mhm.
But in TV, you just do not have that luxury. So that's one thing. I think the compression, of like, that's just a really cool thing that, again, you could learn from fiction, but I learned it more from watching other writers do it in TV. Just like, here's a quarter of a page. That means it's going to take a quarter of a minute on screen, but we can't spend a quarter of a minute looking at this moment. It's got to be this big, and like, can you do that? And when you do, you're like, oh, it got better
Mm,
sometimes.
right.
And I think, just quickly, I think the way that of course, that doesn't always translate, right? There are things that I'd want to do in prose that just would never work, are unfilmable, shouldn't be filmed. There's uh, times when you want to be ambiguous,
Yeah. Yeah.
that that's much harder to do on screen, ambiguity. So
Yeah. I'm extra excited now to see your film.
I'm talking like I know what I'm saying, but I don't. It's all like,
Yeah. Cool. We'll take the next audience question from Jennifer. I'm at the part about 228 and
Mhm.
how it led to the character's immigration. Can you talk about your historical research and how that informs your writing? How obligated do you feel to represent history?
Thanks, Jennifer. Yes, 228 was an event in history in 1947. Uh, they were basically it was that date is memorialized as the beginning of like a long period of the White Terror. So there was basically a violent crackdown in Taiwan, as people started to rise up against the nationalists. And so there was some. I think growing up, I talked about it with my parents a lot, and they sort of heard from both them and members of the Taiwanese community, Taiwanese American community, and that also inspired me to do a fair amount of sort of research, to try to incorporate into the book. I generally, though, am not. Um, this book is the first one, both in terms of the Chinatowns and in terms of 228, that I've actually ever uh, done research. It's not something that I generally, partly because what I've written in the past is, I guess you could call it speculative in some sense, right? I wrote a novel about time travel. So I guess I researched time travel in a sense, but that's a very different kind of research, right? It was more like just watching time travel movies, and reading time travel books. So that was pretty different. So yeah, I think I always like to, and sometimes I've liked to use scientific concepts, um, to just sort of like misuse them in ways that probably, if you're an actual scientist, you're like, what is this guy talking about? But I just enjoy how importing some of the language of those kind of domains can be, either fun or interesting to bring into fiction, more in a sort of linguistic sense, not in terms of like, I actually think this is about science. So uh, that's a different kind of research, I guess, of just like, what are vocabularies, what are sort of areas of expertise that I can sort of co-opt, and bring into my writing.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions. Our next question is, what led you to write this as a play on Hollywood scripting? What was your artistic goal by doing so versus straight fiction?
Thanks. Yeah, I, I think. I think it just didn't work as straight fiction. I was kind of talking about this a little bit before. It, you know, it, I on a sentence level, I have to be interested in my own writing, and I'm mostly not. Right, most of the things that, as you can tell by listening to me for the last 54 minutes, uh, I talk in first draft. First draft writing is no better, probably worse, and things just don't have this kind of spark or thing that makes you go, oh, what is that? Whether it is compression or unexpected juxtaposition, or just something where um, it's like that thought isn't an original thought. It's just like, it's familiar, it's patterned, and it's when the sentence gets weird that I'm like, okay, that's weird language, but maybe what's underlying the weirdness of it is actually a different way of looking at it. And so when I hit on that, that's when I'm interested, and that's what the screenplay thing did for me. It was like,
Mhm.
oh, this is kind of fun, and if it's fun for me, it might be fun for someone else.
Mhm, mhm. Cool. The next question is from Patricia. What is your favorite book or work, both from your own work and from not your own work?
Thanks, Patricia. I like that specification. If I would definitely not include any of my favorite work, any of my own work to be one of my favorite works. But now I'm imagining this world in which, like, an author's like, yeah, my top 4 favorite books are my own 4 books in this order. uh, I don't know that I can pick one favorite thing. I think if I had to choose a book that was like really influential, it'd probably be Slaughterhouse-Five, Kurt Vonnegut's time travel novel. Um, I don't know if I have a favorite work of mine. I think there's like certain tweets that I'm really proud of. Other than that, I just see the flaws mostly. Like as I'm reading it, sometimes I have to, read out loud, and I'm like copy editing as I'm just reading. I'm like, oh, I wish I could have that sentence back.
Yeah. Do you have maybe like a favorite work that you read during the pandemic that has helped you get through it?
Ooh. I'm looking at my floor to see of the stack of books. I mean, I've been reading. Of course, this question has the magic ability to instantly wipe my brain clean of anything that I've
Yeah.
read in the last 12 months. Uh, I don't know. I'm rereading only because it's literally on top of the stack. I'm rereading Michael Lewis's Moneyball right now. I just love the clarity of his writing. I think it's really interesting. And that is not the book that has helped me get through the pandemic. I should come up with a better answer to this. Oh, I loved this book, Outlawed by Anna North.
Oh.
I did an event with her, and it's a alt Western set in a different timeline. And there's like a lot of sort of subversions of the Western. And yeah, it was a great book.
I don't know if you've read C. Pam Zing's How Much of These Hills is Gold, but it's also kind of like an alt John Steinbeck with Asian characters, and I really loved that book.
I loved that book. This is how I actually did an event with Pam, and I just remember reading that book and going, just like it's like getting socked in the gut, and it's like, wow, this incredible writing, and what a just leap of imagination. There's like a feat of imaginative work, and then like finding out it's her first book. I'm like, just some people you just want to like very angry, like, okay, that was your first book. All right, great.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite books. But wow, thank you so much, Charlie, for your time and for being with us here today. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for watching, listening, and participating. Thank you again, Charlie, for answering all of my questions and for answering the audience questions with so much thoughtfulness. With that, we will wrap up, and I wish everyone a very happy New Year.
Thanks so much, Holly. Happy New Year.
Of course.